Hi everyone and welcome to the second session of Unplugged sessions. Well, my guest today is Alasdair, a colleague of mine who has established much of his reputation as a composer and a performer. He has also worked in education with young people and is the artistic director of St Magnus Festival, which happens up in Orkney. But enough of me talking, and welcome Alasdair. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Very good.
Why don't you start by giving us a brief introduction about you and your role in the creative arts?
Okay, I've been doing this for quite some time and doing many roles, I suppose. I mean, I grew up right from the beginning, I grew up in the north of Scotland on the islands, then moved to the east coast of the Highlands, then went on to study music. And from that point on, I wasn't quite sure what I was going to be, and certainly composer was not necessarily an obvious route at that point. So I worked in theatre. I worked as an opera repetiteur, wrote some music, often for nothing, for people that were friends, and slowly but surely, I guess, being a composer became something that I realised I was really interested in. But I've always, as a musician, I suppose, slightly old-fashioned, maybe, done lots of things. I like to make concerts happen, I like to write the music, I like to be playing or conducting, and even just behind the scenes producing things, making it happen. So in a funny kind of way, the road towards directing festivals and all that sort of side of things, being a producer if you like, has always been in the background. I've never been somebody that only plays the piano or writes music or one single thing. I like to mix it up a little bit.
It's amazing. All right, so I believe then that being a musician yourself and a composer yourself, it must really inspire you for the program of St. Magnus. How does that reflect on your work?
Um, I think it's interesting being, it's really difficult in this profession. We all know this if you're a creative or even a performer. It's difficult to get jobs, to get a platform, to be seen for the first time, etc. And the lovely thing about becoming someone who works on the other side, if you like, of the platform as a festival director, is that you have the opportunity to understand how it is for performers and composers,
Yeah.
but you also have the opportunity to make things happen and to put things on stage, to give somebody a chance who you think is interesting or talented, maybe give somebody their first opportunity, or bring together. I mean, the other lovely thing is bringing collaborators together,
Of
bringing
course.
projects together that you may see two people and think they would work well together, and actually it's possible sometimes to do that. And I mean, I've been lucky in that regard to work both sides of poacher and gamekeeper, you might say, because I've seen how it works and how it feels to be looking for opportunity, and now I have the ability to offer opportunity. But I think it's also, it's been interesting. St Magnus, I've been doing for 10 years. I was also festival director at Bath International Music Festival and have been involved in sort of programming elsewhere. And I think it's interesting as a composer because what you do for a living is basically start with a blank piece of paper and make some music, make some noise, as it were. And to some extent, the same process goes to making a festival. So I think it's no surprise that you will find that across producers who are actually working artists, a lot of them are festival directors, etc., are creative people. In music, are composers, because it's like a big composition putting a festival together.
Okay.
It's an exercise in making something that not only is a good project at 7 o'clock on a Tuesday, but is a good project as a whole experience from Friday through to the following week. So for me, it's a strange exercise in almost making a creative statement. Obviously, other people are doing it for me, but the programming is more carefully thought than people might think sometimes.
What are the changes that you have seen since you started the role, actually?
Oh, what are the changes? I guess one of the changes that seems very obvious, maybe to me, and isn't, I don't know whether it's important as a thought or not, but is the number of festivals that have emerged even in the last 10 years. I guess the idea of creating an event, a festival, either because a town has an interesting piece of architecture or there's a theme that can be exploited or whatever. Even within Scotland, I would say that there is now, and it's great in so many ways, there are so many festivals pretty much starting with us in Orkney, and you can name a music festival which takes you pretty much through till October. Almost one after the other. Now, when I first started, a few of those would not have existed at all. The flip side of that, of course, is the more people doing that kind of thing and looking to make a festival, there is more pressure on raising money and funding and all those sorts of things, because there are lots of good causes with legitimate reasons why they should earn their money. But I suppose that's a sort of superficial thing, if you like, in terms of changes. I mean, I guess the other change is simply the sort of technology, the social media, the way that we all sort of communicate, but communicate our marketing and tell people what we do, which, you know, increasingly at the moment looks like it may be a sort of more important tool than it perhaps has been today. But that certainly has changed. And simply, you know, when I started, there was barely online booking for tickets.
Of course.
It was a very new thing to book a seat online. To have a website was, you know, so in so many ways, I've, you know, both as a composer and working in festivals, you know, I am the generation that still used and still do use a pencil and paper, because computers that you could put your music into didn't exist. Same is true with festivals. When I started, as I say, the website was a very sort of small background part of what St Magnus was. It was still all about. So I think, you know, it's a lot of the things that probably in the last decade and more maybe have changed in all of life, have changed in the festival world.
True. I just wanted to explain where Orkney is for those who don't know. So basically, Orkney is a tiny little island up north of Scotland. So very cold and very beautiful, though.
It's very, and not just an island. It's 16 or 17 inhabited islands and a few more besides. So it really is the Orkney Islands. It's a group of
number of islands.
It is, yes. And indeed a part of Scotland which takes in history from the furthest back, Stone Age villages and beyond, through the Vikings, through medieval history, through to the First and Second World Wars. It's a very rich environment, historically, architecturally, archaeologically, whatever you want, whatever your interest. It's an absolutely fascinating place. It's sort of a hub for history in the world.
What are some of the main challenges that you have faced since you've taken the role?
I guess there's going to be no surprise that I would say probably top of the list is always going to be how you pay, how you raise money, how you pay for putting anything on stage. And I think having ideas, having collaborative projects, coming up with programs, thinking of composers, writers, playwrights, sculptors to commission is easy, and it's overwhelming sometimes. You have too many ideas. I think the frustration, certainly I've always felt, is that money always is the bottom line and can get in the way, can stop things happening, can obstruct the best ideas, and also can be very distracting, because it can be, for us working in putting on festivals and the like these days, it can take up an awful lot of time simply trying to make enough money to pay for things that you want to put on stage. So I think that's one of my biggest frustrations. I'm impatient to put good things on stage, and if the only thing stopping them is not enthusiasm and good ideas and good talent and all the rest of it, it's simply not having enough money in the bank. That's very frustrating. In terms of the local frustration, maybe in terms of working in what you've described, a rural location, islands, off the north of Scotland, all of those things. There are some huge frustrations just again in terms of bringing people into that environment, accommodating them, and the cost of all that, because to put on art, you have an attendant cost, which is much bigger than working in urban central Scotland or London or wherever locations. It proves a hugely, as you know, difficult part of the tissue of things we have to do, and an expensive one. So that can be sometimes frustrating. You see yourself having to spend a lot of money simply to put people on stage.
Yeah.
I know I'm fixating on money, but unfortunately that's what makes everything happen.
You mentioned technology, and you mentioned also how it made life easier, kind of. Now, the core team of the festival works remotely. What does that mean to you? How does it affect, or does it affect at all the production of the festival?
Well, it's interesting to see everyone currently working with Zoom and Teams and Skype, and because I feel that we have always done that. Again, you described the geography, so it's always been necessary to work with board meetings and with team meetings as a remote exercise often. I don't live in Orkney because I am only employed part-time and I still need to maintain my life as a musician. So that means I've often been dialing in by whatever method. And I think it works actually rather well. There's no doubt nowadays, because of technology, that we can do an awful lot remotely. And it's not always possible to offer as much employment or time in terms of employment for people to be based somewhere like Orkney. So to be able to exploit the idea that you can work with anyone all over the place is a great thing. And actually it works very well, because the flip side, as I always explain to people, from my perspective, not living in Orkney, but using technology to work with them, is that I can also do things where I live that are important for that place, which would involve a lot of travel out of Orkney should I be resident there. It doesn't mean that you can cut out in-person meetings and being around entirely, and it would be crazy if, in my case, I wasn't in Orkney quite a lot, because it's important that you are part of the community, that you are tuned in to how it all works. But it's equally useful sometimes to live somewhere else, to be able to meet with people, to go to concerts and all the rest of it, and see work, which would be more tricky being based up there. But I think, the technology that's now coming into play as we go through this period has really been something we've used a lot, just because that was the way things happened, not because we were in a strange situation, just because that's how we could make it work.
Yeah. So what would you suggest to people who are actually, because many are opting for that nowadays, especially because of the current situation. So let's mention 3 main points of what makes a successful remote working organization.
I think you need to have a good team to start with, that and establish the idea of this remote working with a good team, as it were. So you know that people are comfortable and able to work on their own, but also come together to work and report, etc. In terms of team meetings on something like Zoom or whatever. But there has to be a sense that you've got the right people in your team to work that way. I mean, for some people, I think probably to explain that, I think some people don't appreciate working without an office, without facilities, and might find the idea that they can't consult across a desk or whatever. So you do have to be careful that you're working with people, as it were, as we do essentially, as a team of 2 all year round, and then expanded team, that when you expand the team, those people are good at working together, but also good at working on their own. And therefore technology can work because you can report in. In terms of anything else, I think you have to be quite good, if you're going to work remotely, about sharing a lot of stuff. That not going off too far into the world of information not being commonly available, because that can lead to problems, or it can lead to a lack of knowledge in terms of how things are moving, etc. So I think the remote working does kind of mean that either by putting things on your server or copying into emails, it sounds like a very straightforward thing, but sharing what's happening and indeed any track or trail of anything, because I mean, the other danger with all working remotely, of course, is that if anyone is ill or has to disappear for a moment or whatever, unless you have some common ground, a common filing system, it can really act against work moving forward or someone else taking over. A third point, I don't know if there is a third point in my world. I think you have to get used to it, is probably what I would say as well. I think it's like anything, you know, from playing the piano to writing music to standing on a stage to whatever it happens to be. There's an amount of practice in working in meetings and team meetings and all the rest of it, and getting comfortable with that so that you do get something out of it, and it isn't just for the sake of seeing lots of faces and saying you've gone through the motions. But that also, you know, I suspect it's become something that people have got used to quite quickly at the moment, but
Yeah.
it is about practice.
Okay, next question. So St Magnus has a number of volunteers that work with it, together with the professional staff. Now, I find this very interesting because I myself come from a very small island, and we both know that the island mentality at times can be quite challenging. But I have no doubt that the sense of community is really strong in the end. Can you speak a bit more about this and what is the strategy behind it?
Well, there is sort of no strategy in the sense that it's how the festival started, really. Only, 15 or 16 years into its life did it have anyone working for pay. So the whole beginnings of the festival were very much about an idea that came out of various members of a community, you know, over a glass of wine or a cup of coffee, saying, let's do something in midsummer in Orkney. One of them happened to be a very well-known composer internationally, and another, a very well-known poet and writer, Peter Maxwell Davies, the composer, George Mackay Brown, the writer. So there was some ability to reach out into a professional world. But really it was about a lot of local people from their coffee table, kitchen table or whatever, making things happen. And for a long time that was exactly how it did happen. And slowly but surely, quite some way into the festival's life, it began to have professional staff. Even to this day, however, you're absolutely right. The spirit of that carries on, and the core team that we have for the entire year is me part-time as festival director, and Charlotte, who is festival manager full-time all year, and she lives in Orkney. So really the festival, we're in 40, well, we should have been 44 this year, but we'll be 44 next year. Yeah. After 44 years, we still work with a very, very small team. And as you've described in earlier conversations, we scale up a little bit with some freelance professionals coming in to help, but not for the entire year. And really the voluntary side of things is something that makes our festival happen. We have volunteers who run the technical side of things, the meet and greet side of things, accommodation, stewarding of concerts, box office a little bit, etc. And it's almost impossible to see how we could do it financially and in many other ways without that involvement. It's a sort of core part of things, but we probably involve about 150 volunteers to make the festival happen. Yeah. The plus side of that, of course, is that the community is really involved. It's a wonderful way for people to participate. They can be part of what we do as a professional organisation. They can also sort of be part of what is brought to the island as a big cultural jamboree, a great excitement. I suppose the other side of that is when you have a large number of volunteers, they're an unpaid workforce, and things can happen that mean that they suddenly can't do things for you, although they'd prepared to do them. It can mean that they're not always ready to come on stream as early as we are organising the festival, because for them the work starts very near the dates that we work, not 6 months ahead. Um, and also, I guess, as with any island community and any small community, um, there can sometimes be a bit of unwillingness if you want to change the way anything is done, or change the pattern of events and how they unfold, etc. So you sometimes have to negotiate, be diplomatic, or the opposite, which is be really stick to your guns and say, no, this is the way we are going to do it now. You really have to come with me. And I think it's why I say I like to be in Orkney quite a lot, and I'm lucky to have, over the years before I was director, been there a lot. I think you need the trust of a community to work so intensively with it, but also to rely on it to do so many tasks that, if I were to flip this into a city environment, would all be professional jobs. You know, you would be hiring paid members of staff to do a lot of the jobs which we rely on volunteers to do. And I should say that whilst we have volunteers sort of behind the scenes, part of the festival has always been also a huge amount of opportunities for the community to be on stage. So that's either singing in our big festival chorus, doing community dramas, work with children, you know, school children getting the chance to sit side by side with the BBC Symphony Orchestra and play music in a big orchestra. So our sort of voluntary aspect is partly to make it happen, literally, that nobody ever sees, but also lots of people coming in to have perhaps more spectacular opportunities than many would in the arts, to work side by side international artists.
Well, I feel that we have to address the current situation just a little bit. You've mentioned that St Magnus is only one of your many projects. So can you talk me through what you had to cancel and what you have done during these uncertain times?
I've not had to cancel too much, actually, which is good in many ways. The last year I've been sort of working a lot with St Magnus. It does, you know, it's the downside of part-time jobs that are festival directors is they can take up quite a lot of your time. There are some compositional projects that I was working on, but which are sort of in the pipeline rather than we're about to have commissions come to fruition, if you like. So there have been some performances cancelled of mine, but in a way, whilst that's sad for me as a composer, it's lovely to have my music performed, but that won't either earn me my living, and all I would probably do is go to the performance. So in a way, I'm not losing out hugely, apart from obviously an opportunity to have something played. I'm not losing a piece of work that would have put money into my bank account.
Yeah.
So in fact, I've, in so many ways, apart from losing the festival, and I continue to work for them, so I haven't lost that. Most other things at the moment were quiet because we were in that patch that I tried to keep clear because of the run up to the festival. So in many ways, I've been probably a lot more fortunate than other people in that the other bit of my part-time life was quiet enough for it not to be a devastating problem.
It must be oddly weird for you because at this time, you should have been having the festival happening.
Normally, right
in
now,
a few weeks' time.
Yeah.
So
I normally would be getting everything ready to load the car to drive to Orkney to be ready to do. And it's kind of funny not to be wandering around my office sort of throwing things in a pile.
And that excitement of the festival. You mentioned, and we just mentioned actually, that the festival was meant to happen in a few weeks' time. Now, many have been opting to go digital or thinking of creating digital performances. What is your opinion about that? And also, would you consider to go digital at all?
I think there's been a lot of content made by people in a panic. during the first weeks and continuing of this situation. And for various reasons, I'm not as keen perhaps on the sort of from people's front room, from their home performances. I'm sure many people are enjoying them. I have found that the technology actually sometimes just isn't of the quality and gets in the way. Especially if it's music, sound is very important, obviously, and if you can't really broadcast to the quality that one could hear from a CD or a download or something, it's very hard, I think. So I question that kind of interaction. Quickly setting up a concert hall in your front room, I'm not sure about. In terms of the longer run, obviously there's a lot of content out there that was professionally recorded, both in vision and audio, from everything from the Glyndebourne to the Berlin Philharmonic to whoever, which has now become available, and I suppose very generously is available for nothing. I have some concerns about that as well, because I think to sort of set up the idea in any shape or form that artistic content is kind of free, and that it just appears there, is going to prove problematic in the longer run, because somebody at some point is going to have to pay for that or make it happen by paying for it. Musicians can't live on thin air. So if they're going to be there working in an orchestra or in a concert hall or whatever, there are lots of needs for people to be paid, etc. So I worry. I also worry that if too much is available online, people may choose to stay at home
and watch stuff at home
on their coffee table, and not have to bother with crowds and queues and distancing and concert hall catering prices or whatever it happens to be, or travel late at night, because they can actually dial it up. So I think it is really great in the circumstances, and it's interesting talking about where I work, Orkney, a lot, because of course Orkney doesn't get, and that's the point of the festival, it gets a blast of cultural activity, and maybe the odd touring production or something might come in during the year, but really small amounts. So for places that are cut off culturally simply by geography, then I think to be able to share some stuff is fantastic. Having said all that, we have talked in St Magnus about trying to do both those things, if you like, to share what we do across the world, but also to be able to share what we do across the many islands that are Orkney, because it's not always possible for somebody who lives on one of the smaller islands to zip across for 2 hours on the ferry to see a concert and zip back across for another 2 hours. Indeed, sometimes the timetables would mean an overnight stay. So to be able to share what we do very locally, technology would be fantastic. Equally, to share what we do to a wider public, because some of the things that have happened in that festival have been really extraordinary. The kind of concert or event where you just think, oh, this is significant, this is wonderful tonight, I just wish so many people could hear this as well. And of course we've got some beautiful buildings and interesting places to work in, so great backdrops. So we've talked about all these things. They're always difficult to do because it's another layer of activity to add on top. And I suppose in the foreseeable future, one of the other things that you have to build into that in terms of festivals that are in awkward, if you like, geographical places is how easy is it going to be to get even your artists in to perform? I know within Scotland that there are now moves to use more local artists rather than bring in people from abroad.
Of course.
Which makes a huge amount of sense. But it's another consideration, as we move forward. How much are people going to travel to be there, even to do a concert that is then being broadcast out to the world or streamed or whatever?
Yeah.
It's an expensive business, and it's a lot of technology that you need to make something, I think, of the highest quality.
What advice would you give to a student who have no previous experience in a conservatoire and are about to start a conservatoire master's degree? Do you think it's appropriate? Are there any tips that you'd give in preparation for someone who is about to start?
So, masters, you're talking postgraduate.
Yes.
Um, I think that I would consider really carefully postgraduate study and whether you really need to do it at all. I think that doing a master's or doctorate is great if you have lots of reason, purpose, and things that you're going to achieve. And I certainly wouldn't do it just to delay your arrival in the professional world, because I speak from experience in that I finished my first degree and had two options. One was a PhD and one was a job in a theatre, and I went and worked in the theatre. And I suppose for that reason, in my own terms, I just see that the sooner you enter the world of professional work and get that experience, if that's where you want to work, the better, because there's no doubt that all study and all organised postgraduate study to some extent is about that. It's about still studying and not always about the reality of what you'll encounter. And to be honest, the sooner you're in the system, the more you learn, because ultimately you really do learn most when you're on the professional work.
Now I know that the person who asked the question is a soprano, so he's not a composer. So the idea of studying more is to have the opportunity to actually meet others in the industry and to actually learn and focus on the vocal cord.
Of all the disciplines within music, certainly, because a voice develops a lot more slowly, and there is opportunity, for example, within singing to sort of specialize, if you like, in different, as you progress. You might be more a stage animal actor, opera driven. You may not be, and you may prefer recital and song. So there are sort of specialisms, if you like, there. And certainly for somebody to get opportunity to learn repertoire, perhaps to get more stage experience, if that's what their postgraduate as a singer is. And as I say, of all the slowly developing entities in music, the voice is the one that's a little bit different and can take a little bit longer. So I think from that perspective, but even then, I think the thing about doing anything postgraduate, I think, is make sure that you're going to get an awful lot from it that takes you further than it takes you on a journey from where you started that is useful. It doesn't just pass another calendar year or two until you have to make a decision. Because I see lots of people, whether they're singers, clarinetists, or composers, it can be just a delay exercise in the awful decision of what do I do now? How do I start my career, etc.
Describe the arts and culture in 3 words.
Fundamental to life, I think. That's
true.
Fundamental to life.
Fantastic. So would you like to add anything else, Alasdair, to what we just discussed?
I think that was quite enough from me.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thanks for being part of Unplugged Sessions. And speak soon.